We'll have a security briefing from Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, hear from international law expert Natasha Hausdorff, and then meet Israeli Eurovision Song Contest contender Yuval Raphael. From the Stand With Us studios in Jerusalem, I'm Michael Dixon, and this is Special Briefing. Shalom from Israel. We have a packed show for you today, from the military frontline to the frontline of the Eurovision Song Contest. Stay with us for all of it. Actions have consequences. In less than a month, it will be 600 days since the start of the October 7th war. On that fateful day, Hamas terrorists, joined by all too many Gazan civilians, perpetrated a massacre on southern Israel, the likes of which had not been witnessed since the Holocaust. We must continue to remind the world about the burning of families, mass rapes, beheading, kidnapping, and unspeakable atrocities, because many across the globe appear to have forgotten. Since October 7, 2023, Hamas has been faced with two options: return the innocent hostages and surrender, or face the consequences. And on every one of those nearly 600 days, Hamas has chosen not to release all the hostages and to perpetuate the war. This choice has consequences, and Israel has a duty to defend its people. Meanwhile, useful idiots across the United States are continuing their violent demonstrations in support of Hamas jihadis. At Columbia University this week, dozens of protesters were arrested by the NYPD as they organized a takeover of the campus library. These acts don't help to bring about peace or help anyone in the Middle East, of course. All they do is bolster Hamas. And this issue is not confined to one country. A troubling new report by StandWithUs UK highlights unprecedented testimonies from Jewish students who've faced anti-Semitism at universities across the UK since October 7, 2023. The report, which has been referenced in Parliament and in media, calls for a government-backed public inquiry into systematic institutional failings. It's time to hold terrorists and those who support them accountable. Actions must have consequences. Our security briefing with Lieutenant Colonel Conricus in just a moment, but first let's look at headlines from the past week of Israel at war. The body of IDF soldier Zvi Feldman, who had been declared missing since 1982, has been recovered and returned to Israel. A report has revealed that the International Criminal Court filed charges against Israeli officials only after the chief prosecutor faced sexual assault allegations. Hamas captivity survivor Tal Shoham has shared new testimonies in an article for Time magazine. A Stand With Us study has revealed widespread anti-Semitism in academic medical centers. More than 60% of reported cases come from academic hospitals, highlighting a serious issue in medical academia. Our Stand With Us office in Australia reports on a tense election outcome as Labour wins, Greens lose, and anti-Semitism concerns remain high. And finally, Israel's Yuval Raphael is wowing the crowds with her rehearsal at Eurovision 2025 in Switzerland. Well, joining me now is former IDF spokesperson and senior fellow for the Foundation of Defense of Democracies, as ever, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Michael.
And let's begin with the dramatic events that happened this time last week. A ballistic missile from the Houthis in Yemen on Ben Gurion Airport. What's your analysis of that attack and the IDF's response?
So, according to what the Israeli Air Force made official, very few details. I think it's a lot of operational security here that is at play. But I think we understand that it was some kind of modified type of missile that had a different radar signature that made it difficult to intercept. There were several attempts made to intercept it, at least two. They all failed, and eventually it struck within the compound of Ben Gurion, not far from the road that leads to the terminal itself and very close to the tower. But I think that, luckily we had, I think, 7 or 8 Israelis lightly wounded, 1 moderately wounded, treated by Magen David Adom.
Could have been a lot worse.
Could have been far, far worse. But of course, this is economic warfare by the Iranians using the Houthis as their conduit to do it. And what really is at stake here is Israel's ability to continue to sustain civilian travel, but also economic activity. And I don't know if it's been quantified already, but I think we're talking about at least hundreds of millions of dollars of damage for the state of Israel, and that's just within 1 week. Massive cancellation of flights. I'm sure that everybody watching, anybody who's been trying to get to Israel or from Israel, has suffered from it. And I think it broadens the dimension of the situation between us and the Houthis and the Iranians, because it brings economic matters into really the center of what's going on. The Houthis are firing missiles that aren't aimed at military targets, which could be legitimate targets, but this is a purely civilian target that has civilian and economic ramifications. Why is that important? Because if we look forward where this will go and what Israel is going to retaliate, so the first retaliation of the Israeli Air Force was against civilian and military targets in Yemen. But I'm not entirely sure that it'll stay that way, because what Israel did, in my mind, was meaningful, but I still would put it down under the column of blowing off steam. They hit our airport, we retaliated, we hit the airport in Sana'a, we hit the port in Hodeidah, a concrete factory in just north of Sana'a, which was very important militarily for the Houthis, but it's not long-term damage in that sense. And I say that it's more blowing off steam than really changing the situation, because if we really want to be honest here and assess the situation with the Houthis, at the end of the day, if you're not willing to put boots on the ground, or if you're not willing to do a sustained, long-term and massive bombing campaign, then the situation with the Houthis isn't going to change. We're more powerful, we have bigger bombs, better planes, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, they're entrenched, they are battle-hardened, and they're willing to take the beating, to take the consequences, as long as it is about an exchange of rockets and missiles. Why is that important? Because at the end of the day, if we want to change the situation, then I think that the address should be the Islamic Republic of Iran and not the Houthis. They, I think, really are the key in this sense. And if Israel will be willing to expand that equation and to really implement what the Prime Minister for the first time said, that we are holding the Iranians accountable for it, if Israel will do that, then I think we will see a change with the Houthis. As long as we won't, then I think that the Houthis will continue to fire at Israel, as they have over the last week.
Since that retaliatory
retaliatory strike, last alarms were Friday. Just 2 days ago, when they fired a missile towards central Israel, I'd say 2-3 million Israelis had to run for shelter just before Shabbat.
Including in the airport area.
Including in the airport area, which gives you an indication of exactly where we are. The Houthi problem will persist until dealt with differently.
And let's talk about Iran for a moment. President Trump and his administration continue the talks, the nuclear talks with the Islamic Republic. What do we expect to come of that, and particularly in the light of Iran's continued enrichment of uranium and missile development?
I think this is a super important topic to make clear, right? There's lots of countries around the world who use nuclear technology for civilian purposes, most specifically energy. Most of those countries, they have facilities, they have nuclear reactors, but they import the enriched material which they use in order to fuel those reactors. Japan, Holland, many other countries around the world, Brazil, that's how they operate. Now, what the Iranians are saying is we want a civilian program, and we want to enrich in our own country, and then people get confused about the purity or the percentage of the enriched material. And then the Iranians say, well, we only want for civilian purposes, and that's 3.67% pure uranium. First thing is, they have already enriched way beyond that, 60% and above that. the only reason to do that is for military purposes. And what has to be very clear for people is that as long as the Iranians have enrichment capacity in their country, then it's only a matter of time before they will enrich to military grade, and then they will have one pathway to a nuclear bomb. I think that's really where we are now in terms of discussing what is acceptable in terms of the Iranian nuclear program. If they indeed want a civilian nuclear program, they have a reactor in Bushehr. Nobody wants to disassemble it. They can use that for electricity. They can do research as long as it stays without military grade enrichment. And where we are now is that there's pretty clear language from the US saying that no, we are not going to allow any enrichment on Iranian soil, and that we want all of the enrichment capacity disassembled so that there's nothing left. There can be a nuclear civilian program in Iran, and they are totally entitled to it, but nothing that will allow them to sprint towards a nuclear bomb. The Iranians are playing hardball. The Iranians, I think we should acknowledge, are excellent negotiators, very cunning, with a deep, profound understanding of what makes their interlocutors tick, and I think understanding how they can use pressure points and different levers of influence. I think they have a very good reading of the current American administration, what they want to achieve, and they're trying to leverage and to get that. But at the end of the day, I hear more and more American elected officials saying clearly, no enrichment on Iranian soil and a full disarmament and disassembly of whatever enrichment facility is in Iran. Without that, no deal to be made. Now, frankly, I've been saying this, and so have many other experts at FDD. We've been very clear about this, that there's a window of opportunity to deal with the Iranian nuclear military program. That window of opportunity was opened by Iran when they attacked Israel for the first and then for the second time, more than half a year ago. Israel responded, and with using very limited resources was able to almost eradicate all Iranian air defenses. Since then, the Iranians have been replenishing those air defenses, but they are still relatively vulnerable. My concern is that the Iranians are using negotiations as a means to protect themselves diplomatically from Israel taking action.
Waiting it out.
Yes, waiting it out and using that as an effective diplomatic shield. I hope that the US will see through these Iranian negotiation tactics and be very firm and clear. I think this is really at the core of American interest, European interest, regional interest, the Saudis, Egyptians, and others, to make sure that the Iranian regime never ever has the ability to produce nuclear weapons. A civilian program, sure, but enrichment on Iranian soil should never be allowed.
And of course, we still have the situation in Gaza to contend with. Iran-backed Hamas still there. Hamas isn't finished, is it?
No, far from it, sadly. We're nearing that milestone of a year and a half after the atrocious attacks of October the 7th. We still haven't finished Hamas. We still have an enemy to defeat. We still have 59 hostages that urgently need to be repatriated. We're hoping that 24 are alive, even though we hear conflicting reports, 22, 23, 24, but there's a large amount of Israelis that are alive and in Hamas captivity. We want them all home, and we want to defeat Hamas. Now, I think where we are now, looking forward, there's about a month's worth of humanitarian supplies left in Gaza until the situation will start to be really challenging.
But no famine. We're told by many NGOs there's a famine.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that being told a year and 2 months ago, that there's famine and there's shortage of food, and it was lies then and it is fabrications now. Yes, there's going to be shortage of food and supplies in about a month. A lot of food and supplies were allowed in during the ceasefire. About 1,000 trucks every day filled the Gaza Strip with lots of supplies, taken by Hamas, controlled by Hamas, and currently those supplies are used by Hamas as the main way to stay in power. That's why they're so important. And I think that looking ahead, probably within a month, we will see a few interesting things happen. One, is that the IDF will be tasked by the Israeli cabinet to actually start distributing food, to establish these islands, humanitarian islands, in various locations in Gaza. I think we're talking about 3 or 4 locations based on where the main centers of population are. And they're safeguarding that perimeter, and then through other interlocutors, American companies or UN organizations, start handing out food without having Hamas as part of that process. Now, what that will do, I think, is will generate tremendous resistance from Hamas, because that will be a threat to their control over the Gaza population. To be honest, I mean, even though sadly we've had casualties the last week, several Israeli soldiers have been killed in combat in the southern part of Gaza and in the north, but essentially Hamas is below ground and they're waiting it out. I assess that the moment that Israel will start distributing food, that will be a real rallying call for Hamas, and we will see them emerge out, and we will see significant fighting then. As always, I think we have to be honest about the situation here. The humanitarian situation is challenging in Gaza, but I think that there's a solution to it, and that would be to do what has happened in each and every conflict around the world, and that is to allow civilians to voluntarily leave the area. The Gazans are the only civilians in military history that have been actively prevented from leaving a battlefield. No other war, not before the Second World War and not after, can you find an example of a civilian population that is held hostage by a terrorist organization and by the international community as a whole and by a neighboring country, Egypt. Any other conflict you'll name or that the viewers may want to comment on, that's the situation. Civilians are allowed to flee a combat zone. That's the humane thing to do. That's the moral thing to do. And I think it is extremely cruel that the Palestinians are kept inside. And it's not for their benefit, and it's not out of a consideration for their safety. And I think it's very cruel, and I think that the humanitarian situation could improve significantly if Egypt opened the gates at Rafah and if Gazans were allowed out.
What would it take for that to happen?
I think international pressure. First and foremost, Israel has to be clear that this is what we want to achieve, that this is what we need and this is what we demand, and then a mix of carrot and stick with our relations with the Egyptians, but then to leverage international community and to say, well, this is the humane and the right thing to do. Egypt is an Arab Muslim country. Do you not have compassion for Arab Muslims who are going through war? Do you not think that their safety warrants the founding of a temporary refugee center in northeastern Sinai for people to allow to go out and then to return to Gaza once the fighting is over? I think that the Egyptians are getting away with murder in this sense. I think it's very cynical, and unfortunately Israel isn't communicating this clearly and not saying clearly Egypt should be held accountable, Egypt should open the border, and once Egypt will open the border, that will mark the beginning of the end for Hamas.
Let's look at the northern border for a moment. Hezbollah has been quieter, but again, also not a spent force. What should we read into what's going on right now?
Yeah, Hezbollah was and still is, I think, the most dangerous enemy that we have in close proximity to our borders. And this pains me very much to say, but Israelis have not yet returned to their homes. Metula, most of the houses there are still destroyed and untenable. Kibbutz Margaliot, Kibbutz Misgav Am, places that you and I have been and we've taken StandWithUs delegations to it, they are still unpopulated, and Israelis have not been able to return home because the political and military situation still doesn't facilitate that to happen. And I think that's the objective that we have to be really focused on. That is eventually, at the end of the day, what matters the most. If it's safe enough for Israelis to be back in their homes, and sadly, so far it isn't. Now, Hezbollah are in uncharted territory. They're probably in the weakest situation that they've been over the last 20 or 25 years. I see interesting things happening in Lebanon, politically speaking, where the elected officials, president and prime minister, are taking concrete steps in the interest of the Lebanese state to consolidate power and specifically weapons under the control of the Lebanese government, and where they're saying openly for the first time, we're not going to allow this anarchy to continue, where you have armed groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and others who answer to different masters, but not to the Lebanese elected government. And they've said it, and that's been a policy initiative, and I think that's a smart move, smart and brave move on behalf of the Lebanese state. Hezbollah still has tens of thousands of rockets. Yes, they've suffered significant casualties. Yes, their leadership is virtually non-existent, higher military echelon and political leadership. Yes, they have issues with supply, and they have a severe challenge of supplying themselves, but their organizational structure is intact. They have payroll, they have personnel, they have an ideology that still focuses on the destruction of the State of Israel, and we should do nothing but to be very vigilant about what Hezbollah is doing. Last word, I think that Israel is implementing a different policy when it comes to Hezbollah. We have a ceasefire, which more or less is implemented by Hezbollah, the Lebanese authorities, and by Israel. But this time around, what Israel is doing differently, and I think wisely so, is not waiting for threats to materialize and be aimed at Israeli civilians. Meaning, whenever Hezbollah violates the ceasefire, moving into southern Lebanon, trying to salvage weapons or to repurpose positions, the IDF strikes, and does so quickly and decisively with clean, good results, killing terrorists without killing non-combatants, and that sends a strong and very important message. But we're not out of the woods yet, and as long as the Iranian regime exists, they, I'm sure, will prioritize rebuilding Hezbollah, and we still have unfinished business in Lebanon.
Finally, within a month, we'll approach 600 days of war. What's your message to our audience as we approach that milestone?
I just came back from a tour of the US, and I'm going in a few weeks. I think that there is some fatigue. There's fatigue in Israel, of families that are supporting fighters, reservists and regular fighters who are tired of the fighting. There's battle fatigue or combat fatigue around the world in Jewish communities. Many of them are tired of the fighting. Many of them are tired of the waves of anti-Semitism and animosity that the fighting brings. My message would be that sadly, unfortunately, I think we have to still harden ourselves, strengthen ourselves, and understand that we are not done yet. We will be done once Hamas is defeated, once there is a complete and clear not only victory, but that everybody else, all of the other terrorists, understand that Hamas has been defeated. That, I think, is the first. Once that happens, then we can perhaps breathe a little bit and catch our breath, but we still have a lot of work to do before that happens. And my message would be that we have to continue fighting, that people around the world who care about freedom, justice, democracy, who care about defending Israel against these forces of darkness, they have to buckle up still and continue to fight and to support, whether it is in local politics, whether it's in the media, or by donating resources, time, energy, whatever it is that they're doing. I think it's important that people understand that we are still very much in the battle, and it's a battle that is going to take us time. You and I live in Israel, our kids are serving in the IDF, we have real skin in the game, unfortunately, and so do many, many other Israelis. And I think that our viewers around the world need to understand that we still need the support, and that the war is very much still going on.
Important words. Thank you for joining us remotely since October the 8th, I believe. Now it's great to have you in our new studio as well.
Pleasure to be here in your studio, and I wish that truth, good tidings and good news will be broadcast from this studio to the world, and that we'll be able to speak about positive things and not war.
Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
Important analysis. A concerning time in the Middle East and for all those who care about Israel around the world, with Israel being castigated multiple times at the International Court of Justice. We're joined by a leading voice in international law. She qualified from Oxford University, clerked for the President of the Supreme Court in Israel, and she's a sought-after speaker who frequently appears on the BBC, CNN, Fox News and many other networks. She's also a part of UK Lawyers for Israel, a key ally of Stand With Us UK. She was recently honoured for her amazing advocacy and was chosen to light a torch in Israel's National Independence Day ceremony. Our guest today is Natasha Hausdorff.
That military tactic of using civilians as human shields to drive up the civilian casualty count, which forms part of their overall strategy of using public opinion and pressure on Israel to try and achieve its aim of survival. This doesn't happen overnight. It is as a result of generations of brainwashing, and I say that the international community is complicit in it.
Rather than an independent court here applying the rule of law, we're unfortunately seeing the exact opposite. We are seeing abuses of international law, lawfare, which is in pursuit of a political agenda, as I say, where there is no jurisdiction, but perhaps even worse than that, where there is no factual basis.
We were told because Jews in the 20th century differed about whether the creation of the State of Israel was a good idea, that was a reason that Jews couldn't be anti-Semitic if they were anti-Zionist. Well, I urge you to consider a debate between parents, which might be entirely legitimate as to whether or not to have a child. There may be arguments for and against, reasonable ones. But once that child is born, to suggest that it should be gotten rid of would be murder. What we have heard advocated by the opposition today. And so I ask you, if you are, as Israel, liberal, care about peace, and abhor racism, you will stand with the proposition this evening.
Natasha, thank you so much for joining us on Stand With Us TV once again.
Michael, it's my pleasure to be with you in these beautiful offices in the heart of Jerusalem.
Absolutely, and we're thrilled to have you. And of course, you just had an incredible honour lighting a torch on Independence Day, one of the highest honours you can get from the State of Israel. What was that moment like for you?
It was enormously meaningful, not least because I was able to meet all of the other torchlighters and understand more about their backgrounds and their stories. And when we went with the Prime Minister, he said that this is the best of Israel, and I really felt that. So deeply honoured to be a part of it, and extremely humbled that everything that we've been doing for the last 10 years at least was meaningfully recognised. Very, very pleased to have been able to take part.
As it should be, and of course you've become an incredibly inspiring advocate for Israel on the global stage. We'd love to understand more about what drives you and some of the focus on your legal career. So let me ask you first, what inspired you to focus on defending Israel in the international arena, but particularly in legal forums?
Well, somewhat over a decade ago, when I was studying international law as part of my law degree at Oxford, it was already becoming apparent to me that many of the fundamental concepts of international law had already been inverted, were being weaponized against the Jewish state. And it was also apparent to me that what starts with Israel certainly doesn't end with Israel. So this process of abusing legal terminology like occupation, ethnic cleansing, colonialism, apartheid, and now genocide, that this was becoming pervasive throughout, unfortunately, the legal academy, and that this was then filtering through to international courts and tribunals. And I fully appreciate that now, especially in the last year and a half, since the 7th of October, this has perhaps become more apparent to people outside of the international law bubble, but it's something that I was very intimately concerned with, I'd say, for the last 10 years, and through the incredible colleagues that I have at UK Lawyers for Israel, we've been seeking to push back against that weaponization. We've been holding international courts and tribunals to account and calling for the proper application of international law to Israel.
And so in recent years, we've seen legal tools increasingly used as instruments of political warfare. They call it lawfare for a reason. Yeah. And so this strategy has been used to delegitimize Israel on the world stage, in international public bodies and forums. it is a modern battlefield. How do you think the state of Israel itself should respond?
It's a really good question. I've started talking about this in terms of the eighth front of this war. Together with the misrepresentations in international media, the legal misrepresentations here are clearly having a significant effect on Israel's ability to defend itself. This notion that Israel's fighting this war with both hands tied behind its back is unfortunately deeply rooted in the misrepresentations of the factual matrix on the ground and the application in particular of the law of armed conflict. It's clear that Israel is seeking to address that to a certain extent in terms of the representations it's made to the International Criminal Court, also at the International Court of Justice. But ultimately, it's only one voice. And there are very few allies at the United Nations that are willing to push back on those misrepresentations. Really, unfortunately, recently we've also seen the United Kingdom peddling in a lot of the misinformation about international law, calling Israel an occupier, even calling for the International Committee of the Red Cross to have access to Nukhba terrorists, which this is something the ICRC have themselves accepted there isn't a proper basis in international law for. At least their representative at the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Houses of Parliament in the UK acknowledged that these are not prisoners of war. And so the UK, in this respect, is calling for something that even the ICRC have acknowledged is not consistent with how international law applies.
How does this play out in the media? Because we see a direct link, I think, between the legal representations and how Israel is portrayed on the media. What is it that you've seen? And of course, you present yourself and present Israel's case to international media. What are the biggest misconceptions that you've seen?
I often encounter some hostility to my explaining, the application of international law, and I think it's because it is so at odds with the received wisdom and the agenda, the political agenda that has been pushed by the media. It's a strong way to describe it, but justified when one considers that, especially for the last year and a half, everything coming out of the Gaza Strip in terms of reporting has been Hamas propaganda. And the absolute absence of journalistic integrity in acknowledging that, the constraints that journalists are under, in Gaza, but also because of threats from Hezbollah against journalist colleagues in Lebanon and around the Middle East. The fact that they are only free to report from Israel without constraints, because there is true free press in Israel as there isn't anywhere else, unfortunately, in this region. That lends itself to the kind of distortions that we've seen across media coverage of the last year and a half. And there are so many individuals. I've been travelling around the world speaking to policymakers and officials and politicians, and so many of them tell me, well, yes, I'm basing my opinion on what I see on the media. And even, Lord Sumption, when I had a significant debate with him about the International Court of Justice Provisional Measures Order, which he was maintaining, had found that there was a plausible risk of genocide, and I was explaining had only found that there were plausible rights of the Palestinians that South Africa was advancing. He had also indicated that he was basing his opinion perhaps not on the plain text of the order of the International Court of Justice, but on what he was seeing on the television. And so it is pervasive, and it's an enormous challenge, not just for the State of Israel, but I think also for civil society. And I know StandWithUs does extraordinary work in getting the truth out. It is an uphill struggle, but I do fundamentally believe it's one that we have a very good chance of being successful in, principally because the truth, the facts, the historical narrative, and the law is very much on side.
Absolutely. Now, in 2025, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Israeli leaders, warrants that Israel is actively appealing, citing serious procedural violations. Now, what's your assessment of the ICC's approach to both Israel and Hamas, and how do you interpret the broader implications for international justice?
This is a prime example of international law just being thrown out of the window. I say that for three principal reasons. This is a court that has no jurisdiction to have even opened the investigation that it purported to begin already in 2020. So this was under the previous prosecutor. She applied, Fatou Bensouda, to Pretrial Chamber 1 for endorsement of her decision to start investigations into Israelis. It's important to recognise that jurisdiction is what differentiates a court from just a political body. And the way that the ICC operates is that it has jurisdiction that is delegated to it by individual member states. Now, Israel is not a member of the ICC, and it has not delegated any of its territorial jurisdiction to the court. The Palestinian Authority is not a state under the recognised criteria under international law. So, truly speaking, according to proper applications of international law, it wouldn't be able to join the court. But the court sidestepped that and essentially accepted a number of arguments put forward by the previous prosecutor, legal acrobatics, as they've been described, to say, well, they should be sufficiently a state for these purposes. What that unfortunately sidestepped, apart from the fact that the PA doesn't constitute a state, is that the founding document of the Palestinian Authority in the Oslo Accords, this is the 1995 Accord, made it explicitly clear that the PA would not have criminal jurisdiction over Israelis. So, legally speaking, the PA cannot delegate to the court something that it does not have. That's fundamentally why the court doesn't have jurisdiction. There are far more additional kind of detailed issues that I perhaps won't bore you with, but it's this jurisdiction being thrown out of the window that is perhaps most troubling. Alongside that, a big second aspect of this is the court's breach of its own rules. Importantly, what we call complementarity. This is a court that is meant to complement domestic jurisdictions, not to replace them. And Israel investigates and prosecutes any credible allegations. That's something the court simply hasn't taken into account. But thirdly, and perhaps most shockingly, these arrest warrants were based entirely on false information. So the prosecutor very uncharacteristically provided a public summary of his application. UK Lawyers for Israel went through that and demonstrated on the basis of publicly available information that every phrase of every sentence of that summary was false. A lot of this was predicated on this canard of starvation, and every report from the IPC and the Famine Review Committee that predicted famine or starvation in Gaza has been discredited, and it is very simple to do so on the basis of publicly available information from COGAT and other sources about the volume of aid that has been going into the Gaza Strip for the last year and a half.
Let's talk about the kind of war that Israel faces and how that plays out on the legal arena. This is urban warfare. So Israel is having to go house to house because Hamas is embedding itself in civilian structures. So how does international law define legitimacy when facing terrorist organizations in civilian areas?
So there's the overall sort of wider arching legitimacy of Israel engaging in this operation. Now, the fact of the matter is Israel's essentially been in a state of war for far longer than the last year and a half with Hamas. But this is ultimately an exercise of self-defense in removing the threat, but also, of course, seeking to recover the hostages. Let's not forget the 59 that remain in Hamas captivity and the concrete war aims that Israel has been clear about since the 7th of October of bringing the hostages home and defeating Hamas so that they can never present that threat and commit the atrocities again that they did on the 7th of October. But when you get down to the operational activities of what Israel has been doing in Gaza over the last year and a half, there is a framework of international law, the laws of armed conflict or international humanitarian law. And one way of perhaps helpfully summarising that is that there are 4 key principles that any modern law-abiding army has to comply with. The first is military necessity. One can only undertake military action that is necessary to advance those goals, defeating Hamas, returning the hostages in particular. The second is that principle of distinction. So armies are meant to distinguish between their own combatants and civilians, which of course Israel does, and that the IDF wear a uniform, Hamas doesn't, but Israel still differentiates between those that it targets, combatants, and those that it seeks to protect, civilians on the ground in Gaza. One of the perhaps most misrepresented principles, the third principle, is proportionality. And that requires Israel to conduct a careful balancing exercise on the basis of the intelligence that it has before it undertakes strikes, weighing up the anticipated military advantage of each strike against the expected civilian or collateral damage. That's an intention-based analysis, not an effects-based analysis. And so it's really important when you hear commentators and even lawyers opining on whether or not Israel is acting proportionately. They simply do not have the information to make that assessment because they're not privy to the intelligence that underpins the proportionality assessment of each of these strikes. And the fourth principle, which is important to raise, is that of precaution. Precaution which prevents civilian casualties. And in this respect, and I've heard this from military commanders from around the world, Israel sets a standard which is significantly above what international law requires, but it's also one that militaries would find it extremely difficult to emulate. The warnings that Israel provides, the evacuation routes that it facilitates, humanitarian corridors, the targeted precision strikes. It's important to recognize that these principles Israel is applying, it is operating in a context which is unprecedented. The urban armed conflict, where Hamas has embedded itself in civilian areas, has used every school, mosque and hospital as part of its terror infrastructure. And when I was on the ground in Gaza in September, we saw every civilian house in Rafah where we were had been booby-trapped, so that the only route to disarming these traps for soldiers was to destroy these houses. They were also fighting from individual civilian houses and using them as covers for tunnels. And we've heard a great deal about the tunnel network. The ability of the IDF now to fight through that is unprecedented, and I think testament to the ingenuity and the manner in which the IDF has adapted over the last year and a half to uphold these rules of international humanitarian law and to defeat, in many respects, an enemy that is using these rules against Israel and is abusing both, the civilian population, but also the laws of armed conflict themselves as part of its strategy to seek to survive.
You've represented Israel at the Monk debates and the Oxford Union, and of course on multiple different TV platforms. What surprised you or shocked you about either the structure of these debates or what you faced on the other side, or from the audience?
I don't want to disappoint you, but I don't think, I've been doing this a long time now, about 25 years, and frankly there's nothing that surprises or shocks me anymore. Maybe some of the content that's come out of individuals outside of the context of these debates that unfortunately I haven't had an opportunity to address properly. I mean, some of the accusations that Francesca Albanese makes, for instance, are just...
The UN Special...
She's the UN Special Rapporteur for human rights for the Palestinians, and I mean it's blood libel after blood libel, which in many respects probably shouldn't be that surprising or shocking, because it's been the case since the Middle Ages that Jews were accused of killing children, targeting children. I'm afraid there's nothing new in these blood libels, but what I would say has been truly surprising has been some of the conduct of the media in this case, and as I say, the complete absence of journalistic integrity. And I'll give one example. Very early on in the war, in October 2023, the strike on the Al-Aghli hospital. I was actually supposed to be on the BBC, and I got a phone call to say that I was being bumped to run with the rolling coverage, that this was an Israeli airstrike. And the absolute refusal to engage with reason and logic, and my entreaties that they desist from running with a story that they had absolutely no basis to justify and no grounding for, and that turned out, of course, to be entirely false. I mean, the responsibility that media across the world had for riots that erupted as a result of this false reporting around the Middle East, elements like that have been truly shocking along the way.
And it was an Islamic Jihad rocket fired from within Gaza that fell on the hospital.
Fell short, as so many of them unfortunately do. And let's be clear, when Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad rockets that are targeting Israeli civilians fall short and fall in Gaza, they fall without warning, without precautions, without a proportionality assessment. And these rockets have throughout this war been killing many civilians, most likely aid workers too, that of course the finger has been pointed at Israel, and it's part of the Hamas propaganda that the international media has been propagating, that Israel is held responsible for these unfortunate casualties.
Natasha, you were a superstar speaker at the Stand With Us International Conference back in March. You spoke to 650 plus students from all over the world, and I know they hung on your every word. We're speaking now to a Stand With Us audience, includes many young legal minds, also students, young people, and activists in general out there making the case for Israel. I wonder if I could ask you to turn to our camera and give them your words of inspiration about what they should be doing at this time.
So if you're interested in law or not, I would encourage you enormously to pick up the mantle, because I consider this to be the battleground, the eighth front in which every single one of you can make a significant difference, whether it's at your universities or later on in your workplaces or in media or writing to your local newspaper or your member of parliament. Correcting the narrative on the false application of international law is something that I know from experience that StandWithUs students are going to be extremely capable of grasping and encouraging you all as much as I can not to be intimidated by the language around this or the received wisdom that has developed around it. I do think that you have incredible power to push back against these false narratives. I encourage you to use every opportunity to do so, and I know that StandWithUs is here to hold your hand every step of the way.
Natasha Hausdorff, thank you for leading by example, for your insight and for your outspoken voice in the world. Well, following our insightful conversation with Natasha Hausdorff on Israel's role in the international arena and global diplomacy, we now turn to a different but equally powerful form of expression, the universal language of music. Our next guest, Yuval Raphael, is Israel's representative to this year's Eurovision Song Contest. Her song is titled New Day Will Rise, and it's sung in 3 languages, and her voice is more than a symbol of music. It tells of unimaginable survival and enduring hope. On October the 7th, Yuval was at the Nova Festival when the Hamas massacre on southern Israel began. She fled there and took refuge in a roadside shelter. Before long, the terrorists arrived and began their massacre, and Yuval lay motionless, hidden beneath the bodies of others, fighting to survive. Her path to the Eurovision stage is a testament to resilience, a stand against hatred, and a beacon of hope in the darkest moments. Yuval, we're so excited to have you with us. How are rehearsals going?
Oh, wow. Nonstop, around the clock, every single day, every single minute. Absolutely amazing. Very excited to be completely concentrated into one thing and have your 100% in this amazing, beautiful project. Very, very excited.
And there may be some people just getting to know you because of the Eurovision Song Contest. So for those people, who is Yuval Raphael?
Oh, wow. That's a beautiful question. Well, first of all, I'm a very, very family-oriented person. I love my family. I'm very connected to them, and I think it's the most important thing in the world. I love art, not only music. I'm a person of lots of love. I love to do meditations. I used to ride horses. I don't know, I think that's it. Yeah, very family oriented. I'm a very lovable person. I'm friendly. Yeah.
Now, in order to secure your place as the Eurovision contender, you won the Israeli TV show Kochav Haba, Rising Star. What did that moment feel like for you?
Oh, wow. It felt surreal, first of all, but I felt like my dream is coming true. You know, I felt like I was there, but I wasn't there. But also, all of these emotions at once, it's an incredible, very, very big moment for me.
Could you ever have dreamed that this moment would come?
I have dreamed about it a lot. Wow, I always wanted to be a singer and performer, an actress. So I've always dreamt about having it as a career, and also, as a contestant in a music competition, being the winner, the best dream ever.
Now, what does it mean to you to be representing Israel this year of all years?
Wow, it means the world to me. First of all, representing my country in such a big international stage is both an honor and a very big responsibility. And I'm very, very proud and honored. I would just love to just give the best performance that I can. And I'm working very, very hard on it. Yeah, very, very honored.
Now, Yuval, let's take a look at some of the online reaction to your song.
New day will rise. Everyone cries. Don't cry alone.
Israel, you never disappoint, man. Like, I mean, Israel is going for the gold again. Wow.
Wow. Oh, she's singing French. French? This is French.
Introduced to a part of the song in French.
You could feel for the Israeli people, you know, and about everything that's going on with the war and everything. And pretty much close to the end of my reaction, or I don't know when exactly I said it, but I said that there will be light at the end of the tunnel. And 1 year later, we are here with Yuval and this song, New Day Will Rise. She sings exactly about that, you know. Israel has suffered a lot. It is a country that suffered, you know, a lot throughout the years, throughout history overall. But she sings again, New Day Will Rise. If you cry, don't cry alone. She pretty much says that Israeli people, you know, they got each other's back, you know, like they support each other. They will be there together through thick and thin, you know, it's through rising and falling, you know, and now it's time for Israel to rise. You know,
It's giving me chills. Ooh.
Ooh, I do like her voice a lot. I love this dramatic violins right there. And the song is like super emotional. It's pretty cool though, how she combines it like bilingual style too. She does it really well. But the song itself is really, really good. It's well written. Her voice is fantastic. 9.7.
Some of the reactions from around the world to your song, A New Day Will Rise. How does it make you feel to see that incredible response?
Incredible, incredible. I just saw a few of them and they're both funny and hilarious and also very emotional. They made me very emotional. It's so exciting to see those kind of reactions, you know. It's something that I've worked very, very hard on, and to see people connecting to it and getting emotional from it and all these kinds of emotions, it's very, very exciting.
Yuval, what's the message that you want people to take from your song?
Oh, wow. What I would hope to achieve, or the message that I would like to spread out, is very much connected to the words of the song. There are a few lines that say, everyone cries, don't cry alone, which is a message that I would love to spread out, because I feel like all of us are going through struggles, all of us are going through ups and downs, and embracing each other and supporting each other, having each other's backs. It's just such a beautiful thing. So yeah, just, you know, love and unity. Unity is very important to me. So yeah, just maybe to spread a lot of love.
Now you've got big shoes to fill. Israel has always performed well at Eurovision. Noah Kirel came third. Last year, Eden Golan did incredibly well on the popular vote, came fifth. So here's the big question. Can you win it?
I believe in my heart that I can, and I really, really hope so. I would love to, obviously.
And finally, what's your message to Stand With Us followers around the world?
My message to Stand With Us followers is, well, first of all, I want to thank you guys so much. If there's supporters out there, I want to thank you. And hopefully I'm going to make you guys very, very proud. I'm working very hard on it. So yeah, just sending you guys so much love.
Yuval, you know that when you get up on that stage, we'll all be cheering you on, and we'll all be voting for Yuval Raphael for Israel to win Eurovision 2025. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
That's our show for today. Don't forget, if you enjoy our shows and want to be kept up to speed with all that's happening in Israel, be sure to click on the subscribe button on the Stand With Us YouTube channel. And before we go, if you'd like to join our efforts, you can do something great today. Go to standwithus.com/donate to support our work. And our UK office has a special fundraiser for their important work. If you're in the UK and you want to support them, go to standwithus.com and click on the campaign. We're sending love to the Israeli troops and to our brothers and sisters and allies worldwide, and our prayers for every hostage to be back home with their family soon. Together, we will prevail. Thanks for watching. Israel Chai.